Beep, 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 beep. Morning all. Jester here. How are we? Right, okay. Great article in Spiked. In the Dubras, as usual. Okay. Canadian warrior teachers, where are you? We've had some applications from Americans as well, who are up at 1 a.m. in the morning. So that's good. UK time, right? So that's good, isn't it? Buy me a coffee if you can. Give me a super thanks. Do whatever you can. Help keep the old thing going. Fantastic to see. Let Win speak yesterday. Apparently I got a shout out, which is fab. Thank you very much. Thank you. You lovely person, you know who you are. Right, okay, so here we go. Spiked. Ben Appel, who is, I believe, a gay man. 14th of May, this was when the article was published, and it's really worth having a read of, as well as listening to me wibble on for the next few minutes. I suggest it's something that you will enjoy. So here we go, let's begin. Ben says, when I was a young boy, I loved spending the night at my grandmother's house. There, I could stay up as late as I wanted. And in the morning, there would be cinnamon toast crunch for breakfast. But the best part was raiding the closet in her basement, which was full of the gowns she had worn in 1960s and 1970s. Frilly pink and purple confections made of lace, chiffon and silk. This is a man after my own heart. I would put them on and watch the Golden Girls. Just, yep, there are so many gay men out there going, that was me. I'd watch the Golden Girls sophisticatedly sipping Coke from a wine glass. This is just, they talk about stereotypes. It's just so true though, isn't it? That's because stereotypes are often true. Mull on that, right? Sipping Coke from a wine glass. When I was 9, my dad bought a video camera, a giant monstrosity that my siblings and I struggled to balance on our shoulders while we filmed home videos. Alone, I'd prop the camera on the coffee table and record myself modelling various outfits, explaining to the camera why this plaid shirt went with these cargo shorts, or why this teal starter jacket complemented these acid-wash jeans so perfectly. I captured on camera the dance I had painstakingly choreographed to Marky Mark and the Funky Bunch's Good Vibrations. This is fantastic stuff. The exploration of a gay child there, you know, doing what many of us did. As a kid, I followed my 2 older sisters around like a shadow, mimicking their mannerisms, the way they tucked loose strands of hair behind their ears when they were concentrating on their maths homework, the way they jutted their lips whenever they were talking to cute boys. Like them, I was a naturally athletic kid. My favourite sport was lacrosse, but I much preferred to play with the girls instead of the boys. The boys were quick to push and shove, and they loved to whack each other with their aluminium sticks. Girls relied more on their speed, their reflexes, and the skills they'd honed to keep the ball securely cradled in the shallow mesh of their wooden sticks. Why is this so reminiscent of Centrinians? Do you remember Centrinians? With Flash Harry, and a marvellous, was it John Sims? No, it wasn't John Sims. That was the master in Doctor Who. Who was the bloke that played the main woman? Alistair Sims, that was it. Alistair Sims in Centrinians. I grew up, Ben continued, in a fundamentalist Christian community. Most people would call it a cult. From in kindergarten to the 6th grade, I attended the community's tiny school. Because enrolments were so low, there was no in crowd, no separate cliques of jocks and geeks. In retrospect, I'm sure my classmates and especially my teachers noticed my gender nonconformity. All of my home videos prove that it was glaring, but it went largely ignored. Much, I'm sure, Ben, is the same to be said of many of us. All that mattered was that we were good Christians, that we loved Jesus and evangelized God's word to as many people as possible. When I learned about homosexuals in Bible class, or about AIDS, which we were told God had created to punish homosexuals for their sins, I didn't think for a moment that I was one of them. Sure, my first real crush when I was 11 had been on a boy, Elijah Wood, an actor about my age, whose performance in the 1994 B-movie North had captured my heart. But at this time, before sexual maturity, I mistook the longing I felt for Elijah with the more sanitized desire to simply keep his company and be his best friend. I indiscriminately absorbed all of the lessons I learned about homosexuals as if they were and would always be irrelevant to my life. The summer after my 6th grade year, my family left the community and we moved to a neighbouring town. I began 7th grade in a large public school where there was definitely an in crowd. My new classmates wasted little time informing me how unacceptable it was for a boy like me to behave the way I did. Ben, you could be talking about me. You know that when you move into the sort of arena where teenagers are becoming aware and those cliques begin to form, it was others that told me that I was gay. It wasn't me that discovered it. And they usually told me that through beatings. So you could, to a very great degree, Ben, be talking about me, and I'm sure many other gay men who will appreciate your narrative here. I did, just to reiterate, my new classmates wasted little time informing me how unacceptable it was for a boy like me to behave the way I did, the way I enunciated my S words, the way I brushed my auburn hair, which I had highlighted the previous summer with sun in. They called me a faggot, delivered me notes that said everyone knew my dirty little secret. They asked me frequently, are you a boy or a girl? Well, of course I was a boy, I would respond, trembling. Meanwhile, I was beginning to sexually mature. I was soon developing crushes that inspired more than just a desire to keep a boy's company. With horror, I realised that I might actually be what the kids are calling me, which I knew in my bones guaranteed me a tragically short life and one-way ticket to hell. That, after all, was what the old form of homophobia entailed, self-loathing. To survive the onslaught, I defeminized myself. I lowered my voice, started wearing baggy jeans and sweatshirts, cut the highlights out of my hair and replaced my Mariah Carey CDs with Nirvana. Soon the fear and anxiety became too much to bear, and the only refuge I found was in alcohol and drugs. In high school, with each passing year, my drug use got worse. After graduation, I lasted 1 semester in college before dropping out. 2 months later, at the age of 19, I had my first of several stays in a local psychiatric ward. I was delusional, addicted to drugs, and suicidal. It was during my second stay in the psychiatric ward that I was introduced to a 12-step program, which was how I would eventually get sober in my early 20s. It was slow going in the beginning of my sobriety to accept my homosexuality. I began to reconnect with the young boy I'd once been. The boy whose interests expanded beyond what was typical for males. I experimented with bronzer and mascara and got French manicures and pedicures. Engaging in these behaviours felt liberating for a while, but eventually the novelty wore off. In fact, they started to feel performative. I realised I didn't need these things to be my authentic self. My ideas, my voice, the way I treat other people, these are the things that make me the person I truly am. In 2011, when I was 28, I fell in love with a man. The following year, I joined the fight for marriage equality. After we won that campaign, I knew I wanted to become a gay activist. I wanted to help create a world in which feminine boys and butch girls could exist peacefully in society. A world in which gender non-conforming people were accepted as natural variations of their own sex. Minorities, sure, but real and valid nonetheless. In 2017, at the age of 33, I enrolled at Columbia University, New York, to complete my undergraduate degree. There, I was shocked to discover how gay activism had evolved since marriage equality became the law of the land. The focus was now entirely on personal pronouns and on being queer. My classmates labelled me cis, short for cisgender. I didn't even know what it meant. All I knew was that they called me cis in the same cadence that the 7th graders had called me fag. Soon I learned about non-binary identities and that many people were literally arguing that sex, not gender, was a social construct. I met people who evangelized a denomination of transgenderism that I had never heard of, one that included people who had never been gender dysphoric and who had no desire to medically transition. I met straight people whose trans non-binary identities seemed to be defined by their haircuts, outfits, and inchoate politics. I met straight women with Grindr accounts and listened to them complain about the transphobic gay men who didn't want to have sex with women. All around me, it seemed straight people were spontaneously identifying into my community and then policing our behaviours and our customs. I began to think that this broadening of the trans and queer umbrella was giving a hell of a lot of people a free pass to express their homophobia. At Columbia, I took classes on LGBT history, but much of that history was delivered through the lens of queer theory. Queer theorists appropriate French philosopher Michel Foucault's ideas about power of language in constructing reality. They argue that homosexuality didn't exist prior to the late 19th century, when the word homosexual first appeared in medical discourse. Queer theorists proselytize a liberation that supposedly results from challenging the concepts of empirical reality and normativity, but their converts instead often end up adrift in a sea of nihilism. Queer theory, which has become the predominant method of discussing and analysing gender and sexuality in universities, seem to me to be more ideological than truthful. In my classes on gender and sexuality in the Muslim world, however, I discovered something else too. I learned about current medical practices in Iran, where gay sex is illegal and punishable by death, and where medical transition is subsidised by the state to cure gays and lesbians who, the theocratic elites insist, are normal people trapped in the wrong bodies. I privately drew parallels between the anti-gay law and practices of Iran and what I saw developing in the West, but I convinced myself I was just being paranoid. Then I learned about what was happening to gender non-conforming kids, that they were being prescribed off-label drugs to halt their natural development, so that they'd have time to decide if they were really transgender. If so, they would then be more successful at passing as the opposite sex in adulthood. Even worse, I learned that these practices were being touted by LGBT rights organisations as life-saving medical care. It felt like I was living in an episode of The Twilight Zone. How long were these kids supposed to remain on the blockers? And what happens in a few years if they decide they're not truly trans after all? And all of their peers have surpassed them. Are they seriously supposed to commence puberty at 16 or 17 years of age? These questions rattled my brain for months until I learned the actual statistics. Nearly all children who are prescribed puberty blockers, I'm going to say that again, nearly all children who are prescribed puberty blockers go on to receive cross-sex hormones. Blockers don't give a kid time to think. They solidify him in a trans identity and sentence him to a lifetime of very expensive, experimental medicalisation. I wondered how different those so-called trans kids were from the little boy I had been. Obviously, I grew up to be a gay man and not a trans woman, but how would gender clinicians tell the difference between a young boy expressing his homosexuality through gender nonconformity and someone born in the wrong body? I decided to dig deeper into the real history of medical transition. What I learned validated all of my worst fears. I learned that for decades after their invention, synthetic sex hormones were used by doctors and scientists who sought to cure homosexuality, and by law enforcement to chemically castrate men convicted of committing homosexual acts. I learned about actress and singer Christine Jorgensen, one of the first people in the US to become widely known for having sex reassignment surgery in the early 1950s. Jorgensen may now be celebrated by the modern LGBTQIA+ community as a trans icon, but he seemed more concerned with escaping his homosexuality, which he said was deeply alien to my religious attitudes. As Jorgensen put it, I identified myself as female, and consequently my interests in men were normal. I learned that of the first adolescents to be treated for gender dysphoria, or what was then called gender identity disorder, with puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones in the 1990s and early 2000s, the vast majority were homosexual. Well over 90%. I'm adding that bit. And I learned that the studies inform current gender-affirming care practice. Castles of sand built on castles of sound, folks. I mean, you have to appreciate what Ben is narrating here, the story he is telling. I began to feel we had reached a point of no return a couple of years ago during a conversation I had with a supposedly progressive friend. I told her that if I had been a young boy now, I would likely have been prescribed puberty blockers and gone on to medically transition. "And you don't think you would have been happy as a trans woman?" she asked me. Her question left me speechless. I couldn't find the words to state the obvious, that I'm a gay man, not a trans woman, that statistics tell me my medical transition may not have been successful, and that I would suffer severe medical complications. In any case, if I had transitioned, I wouldn't be living an authentic life. After all, isn't that what this is supposed to be about, living authentically? Sylvester, an androgynous disco icon of the 1970s and 1980s, was once asked what gay liberation meant to him. He answered, "I could be the queen that I really was without having a sex change or being on hormones." Perhaps I belong in an earlier era when newly liberated gays and lesbians rebelled against the medical and psychiatric experiments they had long been subjected to. Perhaps my early aspiration of expanding what it means to be a boy or a girl was nothing but a pipe dream. In Europe, there is hope that these medical experiments will cease and that gay and lesbian adolescents will be spared from a lifetime of medicalisation. But in the US, nearly 8 years after same-sex marriage became the law of the land, it is full steam ahead with these homophobic practices. For voicing my concerns about gender-affirming care for minors, I've been called a transphobic bigot. If that's what speaking out against the medicalisation of homosexuality makes me, then so be it. Ben Appel is a writer based in New York. I've got the link to the select article in the Dubert. Thank you, Ben. That's an extraordinary piece of writing, and one that I think bears repeated reading or listening if you happen to be using my channel to do it. Let's make no bones about this. The trans ideology is conversion therapy for gays and lesbians. That's it. That's what it is. Right? It ends. We need to end it, and it needs to end sooner rather than later. After seeing the absolute shit show that was Victor Mardi Gras Bumos, or whatever his name was, when he came over, and also the shit show of the Women's Select Committee and the unbelievable temerity of some of those people asking the questions, and how they have treated the women that went to speak honestly about their safeguarding concerns. And they simply won't have it because they are so filled with righteous cause mentality. You have to see it to believe it. But thank you, Ben, for articulating what so many gay men, I'm sure, would very much like to be able to say in their own words. And this may well go some way to help them to do so. Don't forget this, folks. Gay people are a minority. We always have been. This is a return to conversion therapy. A conversion therapy. And being pushed by the very organisations that we built. We need parallel organisations. We need the end of the old ones. Gay men and women who don't know about this, or do but won't do anything, or do but think they're being allies to the wibbling nutters who seem to have a belief system that's predicated on nothing being real. This is gay conversion therapy. Wake up and smell the coffee.